Genetics, keywords, heredity, passing on genetic material from one generation to another. Gene, the smallest unit of genetic material, section of a chromosome. Trait, visible or invisible characteristics of an organism. Example, eye color, hair color. Chromosome, tightly wound strand of DNA, typically formed in an X-like pattern. DNA, genetic material that contains organisms' instructions to perform life functions. 1. Think about your family. Think about your friends and their family. Think about some of the celebrities you know and their children. Something you may notice is that parents or other family members may look similar to one another. This is because of a process known as heredity. Heredity is the passing of genetic material from one generation to another. 2. When you were born, you had half your mother's genes and half your father's genes. These genes are the smallest of unit of heredity, which can control various traits, which can range anything from height, eye color, hair color, and even the likelihood of developing diseases or cancer. Fun fact, each strand of DNA can stretch out to be 6 feet long. 3. Your deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA for short, is your body's most important instruction book. Each one of your cells, except red blood cells, contain DNA. Most of the time, your DNA is coiled up like a spool of thread, which is why it can fit in the nucleus of each cell. 4. When your DNA is wound up, it usually forms an X-shaped structure called a chromosome. Chromosomes are still made up of DNA and genes, but the difference is in the shape of the structure. Keywords: dominant gene, the gene that is always expressed if present. Recessive gene, the gene is only expressed if there are no dominant genes. Allele, variation of different outcomes for a given set of genes. Genotype, the representation of dominant and recessive genes with letters. Phenotype, the representation of genes based on what is seen. 5. Even though we have genes from both parents, both genes are not always shown or expressed. Genes can be dominant or recessive. A dominant gene will always be expressed if it is present in the child. However, a recessive gene will always be masked by the dominant gene unless there are two recessive genes. Example, brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. So if brown eyes make up one of the genes, even if a blue eyes is also present, brown eyes will be expressed. 6. Since two genes are present and there can be different outcomes depending on the combination of genes, this variation in genes is called an allele. The outcome of the combination of genes can be either expressed graphically through letters or by describing the outcome. 7. A genotype is the graphical representation of the combination of genes through the use of letters. When reading or writing genes, it does not matter what letter you use, except that the dominant gene and the recessive gene must be written with the same letter, but the dominant gene is always written with a capital letter. T could stand for tall. Big T equals 2 dominant. Big T equals 1 dominant, 1 recessive. Little t, 2 recessive. Keywords: homozygous, genotype where the traits are the same letters represented. T or big T, little t. Heterozygous, genotype where traits are different letters represented. Big T, little t. Punnett square, tool used to predict the traits of offspring using genotypes. 8. Genotype is used to express the traits using letters. The phenotype is used to express a trait using words. or how we would describe it to another person. For example, if we use the genotype big T little t to express height, with tall being dominant and represented at big T, and short being represented as little t, since there is a dominant gene present, the organism's phenotype would be represented as tall. 9. When looking at the genotype can either be homozygous or heterozygous. Homozygous means that the two letters being represented are the same, such as big T and little t. It does not matter if it is dominant or recessive, but it can be described as being homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive to represent big T or little t. Heterozygous means the two traits are not the same, such as big T, little t. So even though the letters are the same, we are looking at whether the letter is capitalized or not. 10. We can use different genotypes to predict the traits of an offspring by using a tool called a Punnett square. To set up a Punnett square, you need to know the genotypes for both parents. 11. The first step is to draw a square with a T down the middle. Next, you place one parent's genotype on the top and the other on the side. Step 2. After the Punnett square has been set up, the next step is to match one letter on the top with one letter on the side. The recessive trait, or the lowercase, is always written second. 3. Then use your Punnett square. Then once your Punnett square is complete, you can use it to determine the likelihood of what traits are going to be present in the offspring. The following potential genotypes are big T, little t, big T, little t, little t, little t, little t, little t. 4. Since we know that any genotype with the dominant gene are always going to show that gene, we have 50% going to be tall and 50% are going to be short. At the same time, 50% or 2 out of 4 are going to be heterozygous and 2 out of 4 are going to be homozygous recessive. 5. To set it up with one parent being homozygous dominant and one parent being homozygous recessive, you would put the square together the same way, but change the parent's genes. Then you would move the letters, the appropriate boxes, the same way.